Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Murder at Bedtime with me, your host, Lyndon. If you are a returning listener, then you know by now how awesome I think you all are. And if this is your first time here, then I am dead chuffed you've dropped by, and hopefully I can convince you to return. This is a 15 to 20-minute true crime bedtime story. No frills, no waffle, no adverts or promos until the end of the story. Then you can either turn me off or listen on to me spouting a load of gobbledygook. And with that, let's get serious and crack on. Anybody who researches a podcast knows sometimes you are looking at a totally different case when you come across one that piques your interest and you decide to go with it. That is what happened here in a story that I've titled Karma in Manchester. Olive Balchin was a 40-year-old sex worker who was originally from Birmingham and had only just arrived in Manchester in August of 1946. Everybody in the UK was still feeling the pinch from the Second World War, which had only finished the year before, and life must have been tough for a middle-aged single woman plying her trade in this dangerous work. She had probably moved up north believing that there was more money to be had in Manchester. I'd like to say I'm very sorry I couldn't find more details on Olive's life, but there just wasn't any to be found. She had been staying in a woman's hostel, and the last night she stayed there was on the night of the 18th of October 1946. The last sighting of Olive was around midnight on the 19th of August, where she was seen having an argument with a man at the corner of Cumberland Street and Deansgate in Manchester, near to a bombed-out building, which is where she was found at 11 a.m. the next morning by two schoolboys. They ran and found a policeman. Olive was found to have been murdered by several blows to the head. A bloody hammer was found nearby and a sheet of brown paper with the imprint of the hammer on it. Also was Olive's wartime ID card. At the post-mortem it was found that Olive had been hit about the face with a hammer. The bone around her eye had been smashed and her brain was protruding. Her right cheekbone was broken. There were two wounds on either side of the back of her head, and the nail on her left index finger had been broken off. The cause of death was given as being due to laceration of the brain due to fractures of the skull. The police investigation began with asking for witnesses, and they straight away found two who had clearly seen a man arguing with Olive on the night of the murder at the place where she was found. Also, Edward MacDonald came forward. He ran a hardware store nearby and had sold a man a leather maker's hammer for 3 shillings and sixpence. He told the man, "It will be useless for hammering nails, etc., to which the man replied, "It will be suitable for my purpose." Mr. MacDonald parcelled the hammer up in brown paper and the man slid it into his raincoat pocket. The man was described by all three witnesses as having dark hair, a fresh complexion, and wearing a dark suit and a light-coloured raincoat. The police investigation led them to the Services Transit Hostel, where a man lodging there said a fellow guest had taken his raincoat and not returned it. That man was found to be Walter Graham Rowland. He was taken in for questioning. He admitted to knowing Olive and to have used her services at times. And it was true. He had been looking for her because he had contracted venereal disease and he believed he had caught it off of her. He hadn't. Olive was tested at her post-mortem and didn't have the disease. But he had wanted to talk to her about it, but he couldn't find her. Plus, he had a pretty damn good alibi. So what do we know about Walter Graham Rowland? He was born on the 26th of March 1908 at New Mills in Derbyshire. After he finished school, he was employed as an apprentice engraver. In April 1926, he enlisted in the army, but his parents paid for him to be discharged on the 1st of June 1926. Not a cheap thing to do in those days. Amazingly, he re-enlisted in the army in January 1927, but not so amazingly, he lasted only 16 days before being discharged for being medically unfit. It was now that he turned to criminality. In February 1927, he was convicted of stealing, but was bound over for 1 year. In June 1927, he was convicted of grievous bodily harm on a woman and was sentenced to 3 years in Borstal. Now, anyone who has seen a young Ray Winston in the film Scum will know that this is a very grim place. He was released on licence in 1929. He married his first wife in May 1930, but unfortunately she died in childbirth 10 months later. In 1931, he married again, this time having a daughter called Mavis Agnes. In October 1932, Rowland was convicted of robbery and attempting suicide, presumably not at the same time. And in 1934, he was convicted of something that I will get back to later. He served 8 years before being told he would be released if he would join the army. It was wartime, and presumably they weren't fussy who they recruited. So he survived the war, and here we are in 1946, and the police have 2 eyewitnesses who saw Rowland arguing with Olive at the murder scene, another who sold him the hammer, a motive that he believed that Olive had given him venereal disease, and dust from the bomb site found in the turn-ups of his trousers. But as I said earlier, he had a really good alibi. On the evening of the murder, he had been to visit his mother in Stockport, which is approximately 7 miles outside Manchester. From there, he went to a pub in Stockport where 3 policemen verified he was there. He then caught a bus back to Manchester at 10:30 p.m. and booked into a lodging house at 81 Brunswick Street, which the landlord confirmed. But all the witnesses picked him out of an identification parade. The evidence was very circumstantial, but Rowland was charged with the murder of Olive Balchin. The trial at Manchester Crown Court took 4 days, and the jury found him guilty of murder. Judge Mr. Justice Sellers sentenced Rowland to death. The jury were then informed that the 8 years that he served between 1934 and 1942, he had been serving a life sentence for strangling his 2-year-old daughter, Mavis Agnes, to death with a stocking. He had originally been sentenced to death, but that was reduced to life imprisonment. But he served just 8 years because of the war. While Rowland was awaiting execution, the governor of Liverpool's Walton prison received a note from one of the inmates, David Warne, who claimed it was he who had murdered Olive Balchin. This claim was investigated by the Home Office, but Ware retracted his statement and none of the eyewitnesses recognised him. In the end, Ware was just deemed to be one of those people who admits to everything. Rowland appealed, but he lost and was taken away, protesting his innocence and shouting that it was a travesty of justice. On Thursday, February the 27th, 1947, Walter Graham Rowland was hanged by Albert Pierpoint at Strangeways Prison, Manchester. He left 2 letters, one to his parents swearing his innocence, and one to his solicitor begging him to continue and clear his name after his death. In July 1951, 4 years after Rowland was executed, David Warren, now living in Bristol, walked into a hardware shop and bought a brand new hammer. He then lured a woman, a complete stranger, to an open field and smashed her over the head with the hammer repeatedly. The handle broke, which surely saved her life. When arrested, he admitted he just had the urge to kill a woman and had bought the hammer just for that purpose. He was found not guilty at trial by way of insanity and was sent to Broadmoor Hospital for the criminally insane, where on the 1st of April 1954 he hanged himself. So was Rowland reprieved for a murder he definitely did commit and hanged for a murder he possibly didn't? And did karma come to Manchester? So that's the end of that little story, and what did you think of that? I hope you found it as interesting a story as I did when I came across it. So to anyone who is switching me off now, good night, sleep well, and hope you will join me next time. And for anyone who has kindly stayed up to listen to me waffle on, firstly, I would like to say, if you have enjoyed this story, please subscribe and rate. It's free and it really does help. Secondly, I'd like to put a shout out to British Murders Podcast and also with his YouTube channel, written and hosted by Stuart. It's a brilliant podcast of the more obscure British murders and some of the better known ones too. You can find him on Instagram and Twitter where there are links to his podcast. Please give him a listen as it's a great podcast and also he's a really top bloke too. Also, a quick mention to some lovely ladies. Lindsay at Stolen From Me podcast, Debbie at the Right Shoe podcast, Cindy and Diva at Twisted Listers podcast, Gisela at Grizzly Books podcast, and Marissa at True Crime Bones podcast. These ladies have all helped me with my podcast at some time and are very kind. Debbie Sue of the Right Shoe podcast and I will be doing our 3rd collaboration next weekend. This time it's a British murder, the murder of Rachel Nickell. Very excited about that one as they are proving quite popular. And also, I will soon be doing a collaboration with the lovely ladies of Sugar Coated Murder. So looking forward to that very much too. Anyway, I think that's the waffle time over for this week. Once again, thank you so much for listening and making an old man happy. Good night, stay safe, and please watch out for those frogs in boxes. They are nuts. Night night.